Hi there. It's okay. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. I'd be just thrilled to chat. Now, I know you're sleepy, but I just bet it'll make you feel right as rain.
Welcome to prison. Lumon. Yeah, welcome to Lumon. Yeah, that sounds better. Lately, I've been quite obsessed with the TV show Severance. There's many videos about this show, but I feel like no one is really asking the moral or ethical questions about the actual implications of something like this existing in our world and what that would mean not only for society, but for the people who are stuck as innies. Their entire existence is confined to this space, and most importantly, to this place. It's a monotonous existence, trapped, forced to work. You've created a life that is your slave, or better yet, Lumon's slave. I want you to ask yourself, if you could separate yourself into two separate beings, essentially creating a new life from your own consciousness that only exists to work for you, and nothing more than that, would you be okay with that? At what point is a sentient consciousness deserve to be treated not only equally as a human, but also fairly with its own freedoms and rights? It may not share the same life experiences or memories as you, but all the things that make you you, it has its own version of. It has its own memories, its own experiences, and its own likes and dislikes. So what's the difference between your innie and your outie? Why does one get to enslave the other? For today's video, we are going to be trying to answer some of these questions and more about the show Severance. And as always, a brief disclaimer. Haven't seen the show yet? Have you been missing out?
Don't panic.
Here at Oddly Off Script, we want to remind you
Of what matters most.
You. It's why we always say things explained ahead, spoilers expected, or tease for short.
Huh?
The human loves being told how much of a tease there is. And finally, in trying moments, always remember our signature adage to all. To try and fully understand this show, we need to start at the beginning. We need to go all the way back to the creation of Lumon Industries and the founder himself, Keir Egan. Keir Egan was born in 1841 to parents who shared a close biological relationship. He was an extremely ill child who bruised easily and had tuberculosis. He spent a lot of his childhood bedridden. Keir, however, was not the only child from his parents. He had a twin brother named Dieter, who went everywhere he went, and the two of them spent most of their time together. At some point, his brother Dieter convinced Keir to go live in the woods as outcasts. One night while in the woods,
I had no choice but to listen as he spilt his lineage upon the soil.
which basically means he was rubbing one out. Suddenly, Dieter's body began to fall apart and decay and become one with the woods. Keir fled and ran until he approached Woe's Hollow, where the waterfall would drown out his brother's screams and suffering. It was there he claims to have encountered the temper known as Woe for the first time. He later met his wife, Imogen,
The courtship of Keir and Imogen.
while working as a stewman at an ether factory. From there, in 1865, Keir founded Lumon Industries and began his 74-year tenure as the company's CEO. In 1939, Keir died. From here, things get a bit blurry and complicated, as there's not a lot of information about each CEO themselves other than their date of births and period that they were in charge of Lumon for. After Keir's death, his son Ambrose Egan took over as CEO of Lumon Industries. He was only CEO for 2 years before he died. He was the shortest-lasting CEO in Lumon's history. Following his death, his sister Myrtle became CEO. She was the first woman to ever lead Lumon. She was CEO for 18 years. After Keir's actual children died, we can only assume that these remaining CEOs were grandchildren of Keir. Once again, things are a bit blurry and complicated following Leonora's death. We know that the current CEO is James Egan and his daughter is Helena Egan, but what we don't know is when he was born, when Helena was born, or who Helena's mom is. Thankfully, we do have some information from the show that we can use to estimate the range of years she was born between. We know that she is 30 from what Milchek says about her.
Guys, this is Helly. She's 30 years old, she's allergic to almonds, and has weak enamel.
Assuming he is telling the truth, that is, we will take it at face value for now until we know otherwise. We have a partial picture of Mark's license with 2 dates on it. The first number is probably his date of birth, but the second is likely the date in which this license was issued. Otherwise, his license lasted longer than 40 years, and that's just highly unlikely. So if this is the issue date, it's safe to assume we are somewhere between 2020 and 2030. So with this information, if what Milchek said about her being 30 and totally having weak enamel, god that's so fucking weird, this only leaves Helena's birth year between 1990 to 2000. Now we have a mostly complete family tree of the Egan family, and the mysterious figures guiding the company towards its weird and cultish goals. And from here, finally, this is where the severed procedure itself comes into play. The procedure believed to be created by James Egan, the current CEO of Lumon Industries, we now know that it wasn't created by him at all. It was actually created by Harmony Cobell. And we know this from when she finds her notebook of the invention itself.
Mine! My designs! Base code, overtime contingency. James Egan was the inventor. So I've heard.
We don't know the exact date of when Harmony created it, but we do know that it was created some time ago and it's been around for at least 12 years. And there's also a potential hint to the severed procedure being around even longer than that from Bert's husband.
It wasn't 10 years ago, it was 20.
Didn't the first severed office open 12 years ago?
Yes, it did.
Now, the severed procedure itself and how it exactly works, we don't really know or understand yet. We only know that the chip is implanted deep into the brain and interacts with 5 types of brainwaves: alpha, beta, delta, theta, and gamma, which then generates a barrier separating your consciousness into 2 distinct personalities and beings. It's you, but 2 separate distinct versions of you. It's basically a controlled split personality. The chip itself controlling who is awake or active at any given time and prevents each part from accessing the other's memories. And now that we know or have a general knowledge of what the severed procedure actually is, we can finally get into the world and just how much Lumon affects everything in it. With the Egan family looming over this entire world, it is clear that Keir himself is seen as some sort of god to these people. Lumon employees, from the bottom all the way to the top, all worship him as some weird depiction or another as their version of God. We don't really understand why they worship him, or what makes him so special, but the pseudo-religious tones are felt throughout the entire building, town, and the world. From simple things like quoting his words,
Come now, children of my industry.
or worshipping and idolizing him,
Keir, chosen one, Keir, brilliant one, Keir.
you would have to be pretty foolish to not see the religious aspects constantly presented everywhere. For instance, Harmony Cobell had a shrine to him. On the severed floor itself, the only decorations they really have are all of Keir. Hell, the entire perpetuity wing is just a shrine to him and his family.
I think that to be an Egan, what you are is the keeper of an ethos, in which I do believe will one day save this world.
They even have a fully recreated house of his, and weird interpretive dances of what he went through, I guess? Seems to just eerily focus on propping up the legacy of what Keir was and to instill that belief on the severed workers, making them worship him. And even the compliance books he wrote himself, they're written in a way that most religious books are. It describes to followers, or I guess in this case workers, how they should carry themselves.
That through me they may be purified. No higher purpose may be found than this.
The best way we can describe the Keir Simps is they are a cult. They all act and behave like a cult. So that leaves us with the characters themselves. What were their motivations for joining the Severed program in the first place? Each character in the show all uniquely have their own motivations for joining the Severed program. So let's get a quick rundown of their motivations. Mark's motivation for joining the Severed program is the assumption that the love of his life, Gemma, is dead. So by joining the Severed program, he can essentially skip half the day rather than having to face his trauma and the pain of losing her. It's literally shutting himself off to his own grief. Dylan's motivations are a bit different. We know that he has issues holding a job and continues bouncing from job to job unable to support his family. He struggles finding a sense of purpose in his outie life, so by joining the Severed program, he can keep a job and support his family. We don't know Irving's motivations for sure, but he seems extremely lonely. We know at least in some capacity that he was in the military from all the medals he has. and we also know that he's been investigating Lumon for quite some time. His motivations might be that he wants to escape his lonely life or potential PTSD while also completing the purpose of spying on Lumon. There is also all his drawings and paintings in his home, so it's possible in some capacity he may have worked for Lumon in the past. Otherwise, how would he be seeing the hallway over and over again, considering his innie has no idea what this hallway even is? For all we know, Irving could have had a different innie, and there is some reintegration happening which would explain why he keeps seeing that hallway. Helena's motivations are really simple. She joined Severed as a PR stunt, and being the first Egan to ever do so really propped up the company's image, hoping that the people who are against it would accept it and allow Lumon Industries to globalize the program. Little did she know her innie was just as stubborn and complex as she was, and had no problem showing her that she didn't want to be there. At first, it seems that everyone aside from Helena has some sort of noticeable trauma that is the trigger point for them to join the Severed program. But with what we do know about Helena, it is also possible she has her own trauma given the weird dynamic between her and her dad. It may be her way of avoiding having to deal with it while also trying to appease him by doing something that benefits the company. Knowing that each one of them has their own unique motivations for joining the Severed program, now we have a new question. How does a company like Lumon keep such a control on so many potential differing personalities? Well, first, it starts with the very system they've created. The division of your consciousness itself is the foundation that ultimately starts the control. After the procedure, we know that them waking up is extremely disorientating. For instance, when Helly wakes up, she is confused, angry, and scared. The only guidance she has is from Mark, and it doesn't go well.
The questions made you feel afraid or disoriented. Well, the good news is, you're at an orientation. Ow!
Let me out!
God.
It shows the immediate power dynamic that Lumon has of the newly created life, and it also shows the immediate dependence on Lumon for anything.
Am I livestock? And that's why I have no memories?
All information they're provided, they don't know if it's fact or fiction. They don't know who they are, where they are, or how long they've been there.
Then what's my name?
Not only with that initial awakening, but Lumon has them under constant observation from virtually every angle with cameras everywhere, even in their workstations. They don't even fully understand what exactly they are doing for their work. They are only told that it'll make you feel something when you look at the numbers.
Work is bullshit.
The work is mysterious and important. Ow!
The innies don't even know who their outies are, so that makes them fully dependent on Lumon for a sense of identity. So with the system in place, we then have the obedience aspect to look at. So how do you keep the Severed in line continuously? Well, that comes in the form of rewards or punishments. For the reward side of things, we have things like finger traps, waffle parties, office outings, and music experiences.
100% is tier 5, that gets you a caricature portrait.
With simple incentives to accomplish or rewarding good behavior with perks, it reinforces that obedience. It's like training an animal. When they do good, you affirm that behavior with positive reinforcement, and when they do bad, you correct the behavior. While seemingly trivial small things, these actually reinforce positive behavior and a dependency on the company again as a whole. When you have something visual to reaffirm that accomplishment, you feel a sense of pride, and we know they value these items. And just like in animals, you don't need to be physical to correct a bad behavior. For the innies, when they're bad, their punishment is purely psychological. We've seen this form of punishment when their perks or privileges get taken away, and also in places like the break room, where they are forced to repeat the same script over and over until either they themselves believe it, or until Milchek fully believes them.
I'm afraid you still don't mean it.
No matter how long or how many days it takes, they will read it over and over again. And we see the evolution of that control in Season 2. As a new way of control, they start to use their own desires, wants, or needs against them to keep them in line. They are led to believe that their rebellion has now given them new perks and privileges.
The bounteous reform. These include tasty new snacks, from hall passes to pineapple bobbing.
When in reality, it's just a longer leash, but a tighter collar. Another form of psychological control they assert is with their wellness checks. They read obscure and random facts to them about their outie.
Your outie is generous. Your outie is skilled at kissing and lovemaking.
This is another psychological tactic to make them dependent and give them a controlled sense of happiness. When they are given that information, it psychologically makes them feel indebted to Lumon for being so generous. We can clearly see how happy these facts make them. This is probably the way Lumon checks to make sure the barrier is still holding up from the chip, since we know they watch them. As mentioned previously, there is the whole religious aspect that they use as a form of control. Irving can pretty much cite Keir verbatim.
Keir said, "Be ever merry."
He practically worships Keir. His adoration for Keir is the same way any religious person sees God. This is even further confirmed because of the weird sacrificing of the goat. Sacrificing was a part of almost all religions at one point or another.
Has it verve, wiles?
The most of its flock.
Is it up to the task?
It is.
Those questions are very reminiscent of the sacrificing of the best of the flock to God. It's a weird yet effective way to keep them in line, through manipulation, fear, and appraisal, the combination of which in the end completely backfires for all those in MDR. I think it's safe to say no one likes being told what to do, what to think, or how to behave. The harder you try and push someone into those things, the more they will end up resenting you and push back against it. I imagine if the other departments were pushed equally as hard or were equally as important, they would end up breaking just like the main characters did and rebel. That is a safe assumption given the ending and the acts of defiance we see from Lorne of MND and the marching band's defiance from CNM.
Fuck you, Mr. Milchick.
The other departments all seemed to already be on the edge of resisting. All it took was a little push from MDR and they were on their side. Now with all the psychological control, cruelty, and torture we know from Lumon, finally, we now have to face the toughest questions. It's a weird title, but it's a valid one. If there are two fully functioning beings that have full sentience and a life of their own, but are contained to one body, does that make both of them, legally speaking, alive? Does that mean one has more rights or full rights over the other? Well, in our world, people with dissociative identity disorder are mostly seen and held accountable as one being. There's only extremely rare cases of people being fully acquitted criminally from their charges because of dissociative identity disorder. The first ever, and probably most notable, being Billy Milligan in 1978. And even then, it was only after 9 different medical doctors and a history of him being in a psychiatric ward did they all come to the same conclusion about it. And he was acquitted of all charges. In the case of Severance, however, this is a bit different, at least legally. First, we know for a fact, and so does everyone in the world, that there's actually 2 distinct individuals residing within one body. That isn't in question at all, it's a fact. The innie and the outie. Secondly, in Severance, the people who joined the Severed program volunteered to join. We know this from their entry videos.
I have, of my own free accord, elected to undergo the procedure colloquially known as severance.
They were not forced, they willingly volunteered. So the question becomes, are their innies even counted as people at all? Well, from the outie perspective, no, they're not. We know this from how their outie treats the innie.
I told her I wanted out and she told me I wasn't a person. My own self told me that.
For those that would opt into never having to work a day in their life, their argument would probably be that the totality of one's body is all that matters to a person's actual identity, meaning their alter self has no rights, and no, they are not people. They are still just me, one and only. But that argument falls on its face when you sum up the autonomy of one's self. If you right now wanted to go outside but couldn't leave, and every time you tried you were put back in, forced to work, and if not you were punished, that is not autonomy, that is not freedom, that is prison, that is forced labor, and that, at its core, is slavery. You have enslaved yourself. If you were the one stuck spatially, temporally, and with no autonomy of your own and forced to work, you would probably be saying something different. Think of it in the sense of being criminally charged for something you didn't do, or you don't remember. You don't have a choice, you just have imprisonment. That is all you will ever know. Legally, more than half of all countries across the globe see slavery as a crime and a human rights violation. But when it comes to severance, we know it's a bit skewed, or at least in a bare minimum, what the actual perception of a living entity actually is and what gives it the same rights as you or I. In terms of the government in Severance, it's a safe assumption that the government either turns a blind eye to it or views the severance procedure itself from the eyes of the outie who volunteers to become severed. At least in that regard, it's people volunteering for it, so they see it as a freedom of choice. They probably view it the same as you choosing to drink or smoke. It's your freedom of choice.
Trying to save people from their own choices. Did her Inzi have a choice?
The world doesn't really understand the complexities of what actually happens to the severed individuals once that switch is flipped. So, if from a legal standpoint there seems to be a massive gray area since they opt in and volunteered, then that would show that there's an extreme lack of transparency on Lumon's part, or at least in some capacity, Lumon has government officials in their pockets, which is probably more likely since we do know at least a senator and his wife are using severance to dodge the process of childbirth. If there's one government official, there's probably more.
Angelo Arteta.
And it's kinda obvious that the government doesn't really care at all, or even understand anything from the innies' perspective, since virtually nothing happens when the innies use the overtime contingency to try and get the word out about what they're going through. I don't believe anything that Milchek says happened ever even actually happened.
As a group, you've become known as the face of severance reform.
With the control that Lumon Industries has, it stands to reason that it was another cover-up or quickly swept under the rug as if nothing happened.
Earlier this evening caused me to say some deeply regrettable things.
So legally, if we're left in this limbo gray area, well, what does that say about us ethically and morally? We as humans, I believe, are inherently self-centered, narcissistic, and extremely destructive. For the most part, I think humans as a whole will do whatever they have to further their own ambitions, wants, or needs. I don't think there's really a lot of people that would disagree with that, and it takes a rare person that would entirely sacrifice their own self for that of another. If severance was real, I think millions of people would be signing up for it. And if we as humans as a whole could shut our brains off for half the day and force a version of ourselves to do the things we didn't want to do, I don't doubt for a second that we would all want to do that. I don't really think that's a shameful thing to admit. No one wants to do things they find unpleasant. And fact is, most of us hate working. Most people have a job they don't like. We get out of bed every day because we have to. We have to eat, bills need to get paid, and some people have families to provide for. That's just life. So if we could, we all probably would sign up for that. So if most of us would willingly sign up to essentially enslave a piece of ourselves just to work for us and nothing more, well, what does that say about you or I as a person? Are we really that cruel that we would willingly subject someone to something so horrible simply because it benefits us? Does it become an argument between it isn't slavery because it's myself volunteering for it, or is it slavery because I'm essentially creating a new life and forcing them to do what I want with no regard of what they want? And when you ask those questions, you also need to ask the fundamental questions of, is it wrong to bring into existence sentient individuals whose lives will lack all freedom of expression, freedom of choice, rights, or any form of autonomy? And is that life even worth living at all? Would you want to live a life where you cannot freely do anything? I don't think I would. Go ask a prisoner if they prefer prison over the freedom of the outside world. I don't think they'd say, yeah, they prefer prison. I know I wouldn't like it. So why would my innie like it? Outside of my own personal thoughts on the issue, there is the greater implications of what does that say about humanity as a whole when we would willingly sign up to basically enslave someone because we don't want to do something that we dislike. Severed individuals live a life of no true value or autonomy. They are seen as two separate beings that share the same body. One is a slave and the other gets to live a normal life. That is what it boils down to. So as a species, if we're so willing to put another person through that, are we broken? This is what leads us into the final chapter. Consequentialism is a theory that says something is either good or bad depending on its outcomes. You can sort of think of it like Spock's famous line,
"If the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
If it benefits more than it harms, then that morally is the right decision." That's what consequentialism is. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Now, in regards to the idea and procedure of severance itself, it could be seen as something that benefits humanity as a whole. Picture it like this. We know that serial killers, psychopaths, sociopaths, and other types of extreme criminals have some form of mental inability to regulate the difference between right and wrong. Now yes, it may be they can't help themselves, but that's the point. If the technology like severance existed, could we not use it on those who have those severe tendencies, or on those extreme criminals in our society? Well, yeah, we probably could, and if you could remove those traits from them, why wouldn't we as a society do that? We could essentially wipe that from them entirely. For the needs of the many, that would be morally correct since it's more beneficial than detrimental. It's a bit messed up to say, but I think most of us would be okay with that being done to them. Sure, there would be some who are not okay with it, but again, the needs of the many. So morally, it would be correct. In terms of severance, however, Lumon is not doing it for the needs of the many. Their ideology falls under Deontology, not Consequentialism. Deontology emphasizes following rules and obligations regardless of the outcomes. Lumon follows a set of rules and guiding principles that Keir and the Egan family dictate. They ultimately only do what they do to serve their own goals. They use those foundations to justify their actions no matter how good or bad the outcomes. It's the same thing that guides extreme religious groups to commit heinous acts. In their minds, everything they do is morally correct because of those principles. It's basically viewed as their duty and obligation to do those things. They don't care about the outcome or who they hurt in the process as long as their goal is achieved. Consequences are irrelevant. so we know at least the differences of how one is good and the other is bad. But the invention of such a device and procedure in our world would without a doubt be catastrophically beneficial. And yes, that is an oxymoron, but that's the point. It contradicts itself. At first, corporations would try and abuse it, without a doubt. But at the same time, a procedure like this would be under such scrutiny from all angles that in actuality, the pivot from creation of consciousness to medical beneficial applications would be incredibly fast. Many people in the world who have experienced extreme trauma, addiction, or have any mental illnesses like seizures, autism, epilepsy, schizophrenia, or ultimately any cognitive impairment for that matter, they could greatly benefit from something like severance, having that either removed from them or that signal in our brain reprocessed and properly sent. From there, you can imagine what else that technology could do for humanity. Could it cure amnesia? Could it cure Alzheimer's? Brain injuries? Give you more knowledge? Create a copy of your brain and move it to a new body? It's almost endless what this technology could do for all of us. But those things are ultimately the key differences that would actually be morally and ethically justifiable than the current severance as we know it. That version of severance would be helping life, not creating it or enslaving it. If severance was used as a tool to help humanity and help life, that would justify its existence. Creating life from it would not. That is the ultimate and only way it would be justifiable, not only morally, but also ethically. We cannot, should not, and do not have the right to force a life into servitude or slavery. We cannot become what we already see as morally or ethically flawed or wrong in our society. We would be no better than the most extreme flaws and characteristics of our species, and ultimately, we would become that of which we already hate and deem as unacceptable. We would be the ones solely to blame for that. No one but ourselves. Well, I guess that wraps up this video, and it's been a lot mentally, and maybe I overthink things too much, but I have had long talks and arguments about the sheer legality and cruelty of the show, while also praising it and yes, wishing that the severance procedure itself was a real thing. The idea of shutting my brain off to do things I don't want to do is incredibly appealing, and the ideas of what that could mean and how it could benefit humanity as a whole is extremely enticing. But ping-ponging between what that legally, ethically, and morally means can be mentally exhausting. The show is not only intriguing, but also incredibly off-putting at the same time. We don't really know a lot of things. There's more questions than there are answers, and the answers we do have so far are mostly vague interpretations of what we think they actually are. There are so many questions I have still. Everything I've asked myself and everything I've asked about the show constantly and consistently have me questioning so many things. All I do know is I cannot wait for season 3 to come out, and I hope it comes fast. I'm not really a patient person. So if you watched this video and made it to this point and are hearing this right now, you are a legend. I know this video was quite long, so thank you so much for watching. I truly cannot thank you enough. So what are your thoughts about the show? I'd love to have a discussion with you about it, and if I missed any key details, please do let me know in the comments below, because the more answers I can get, the better. Thanks again for watching, and...
I'm so confused.
Answer my question!